You know, when you open up a traditional physical toolbox in your garage, every single tool has a very specific, like, visually obvious job.
Right. Yeah. A hammer hits nails.
Exactly. A screwdriver turns screws, a wrench tightens bolts. It's the design is just binary and it's super intuitive. You don't look at a standard claw hammer and think, I could probably use this to bake a cake or like rewire my living room.
No, the physical design dictates the function. And that is, it's actually very comforting to the human brain because it is categorized perfectly. You see the tool, you understand its designated purpose, and you don't really spend any mental energy questioning it beyond that initial categorization.
Right. But then you step into the world of the United States tax code and, well, modern retirement planning, and suddenly that straightforward toolbox is just full of optical illusions.
Oh, absolutely. It's a maze.
We are looking at a financial landscape right now where arguably the most powerful wealth-building tool in the entire box is deliberately disguised as something completely mundane. I mean, it is dressed up to look like a boring administrative healthcare account.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of a financial Trojan horse. You sign up for it, usually during open enrollment at work, and you think you are getting this one very basic short-term mechanism to pay for, cough drops and copays.
Just a little plastic debit card.
Exactly, just a swipe card. But hidden inside the architecture of that account is an entirely different mechanism, a mechanism that, if you use it correctly, completely rewrites the rules of compound interest and taxation.
And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Parker, and I'm joined by my co-host, Blake. We specialize in extracting actionable, high-level financial and life strategies from the endless noise of the modern economy. And today, we have a very specific mission that could fundamentally alter your financial trajectory.
I'm Blake. And yes, our objective today is to decode a specific account that is sitting right there in plain sight. We are going to meticulously break down the single most powerful, yet wildly misunderstood, tax-advantaged account in America.
So I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a second. I want you to picture this scenario and just tell me if this resonates with you. You are in your mid-40s, maybe your early 50s. You are juggling a seriously demanding career.
Exhausting, usually.
Yeah, totally exhausting.
Yeah.
You might be the classic representation of the sandwich generation. You're sandwiched between raising your own kids, paying for their college or their travel sports, and suddenly finding yourself like actively navigating the healthcare system for your aging parents.
Which is a full-time job in itself.
It really is. And in the quiet moments, maybe when you're commuting in terrible traffic or long awake staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, you are quietly stressing out because your retirement savings just aren't where you mathematically know they should be. You've been doing the quote-unquote right things. Putting money in the 401k, paying your mortgage on time. But it feels like the macroeconomic goalpost just keeps moving further and further away.
That is an incredibly pervasive anxiety right now. You feel like you are running on a treadmill that someone else is just slowly speeding up. The cost of living is rising. The cost of future healthcare is incredibly daunting.
Terrifying, really.
Right, terrifying. And the standard boilerplate advice, which is usually just save a few more percentage points in your workplace 401k, it doesn't feel like it possesses the raw horsepower necessary to close that wealth gap fast enough.
And you have almost certainly heard of the account we are dissecting today. You might even have one right now, just sitting partially funded through your employer's benefits portal. It is the Health Savings Account, or HSA. But here is the central irony, and this is really the foundational hook for today's deep dive. Most people, and there is a statistically very high probability that you are one of them, treat their HSA like a glorified, low-yield checking account for minor medical inconveniences.
Yep, that is the default behavior.
You put a little bit of money in from your paycheck, you go to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription, you swipe the branded debit card they gave you, and poof, the money vanishes.
And that is exactly the standard corporate pitch. It is how HR departments explain it during those rushed 30-minute open enrollment seminars every November. They frame the HSA purely as a defensive mechanism to sort of soften the blow of having a high-deductible health insurance plan.
All right.
They view it as a shock absorber for this year's medical bills, not as a catapult for long-term wealth.
But today, we're going to reveal how to completely flip that script. We're going to show you how to take that little plastic pharmacy card, literally cut it up, and transform the underlying account into a secret high-yield impenetrable retirement vehicle.
I love the idea of just cutting the card up.
You have to.
Yeah.
And we're going to dedicate a significant portion of this conversation to why this specific strategy is an absolute structural game changer for women over 40.
The mechanics of this are just fascinating. Just a simple shift in timing, changing exactly when and how you choose to interact with the capital inside this account. It unlocks mathematical advantages that literally do not exist anywhere else in the entire U.S. financial system. It's a legal anomaly.
But before we get to the massive tax loophole, we have to understand the gatekeepers. Because the IRS doesn't just let anyone walk in and open one of these accounts. You can't just call up a brokerage tomorrow and say, hey, I'd like one HSA, please.
No, definitely not.
There is a very specific barrier to entry. So what are the actual rules of the game here? Who gets to play?
So the barrier to entry is entirely tied to your health insurance policy. To legally qualify to open and contribute to an HSA, and we will use the finalized 2025 IRS numbers for accuracy here, you must be enrolled in what is officially designated as a high-deductible health plan.
An HGH?
Exactly, commonly abbreviated as an HDHP. Now, the phrase high deductible gets thrown around pretty casually by people who just think their insurance is generally expensive. But the IRS has very strict numerical definitions for this. For 2025, your health insurance plan must have a minimum deductible of $1,650 if you are on an individual plan, or $3,300 if you have family coverage.
Okay, so you can't just have a standard gold tier PPO plan where you pay a flat $20 copay to see a doctor and the insurance covers the rest immediately.
Right, no copay magic here.
It has to officially be an HDHP, meaning you are legally on the hook for those first couple of thousands of dollars before the insurance company really steps in to help.
Precisely. The origin of the HSA, which was created by legislation way back in 2003, was actually designed to incentivize people to take these high-deductible plans. The government wanted consumers to have more skin in the game regarding their health care costs.
They wanted us to feel the pain of the bill.
Exactly. The theory was it would drive down overall medical spending if people were spending their own money first. And to make that bitter pill a little easier to swallow, they created the HSA as a tax-advantaged bucket to help people save for those high out-of-pocket costs.
But as we'll see, they kind of created a monster of a wealth vehicle in the process.
Yeah.
Are there any other roadblocks to opening one? Like if I have the right HDHP insurance plan, am I just automatically good to go?
There are two other major disqualifiers you have to navigate. First, you cannot be enrolled in any part of Medicare. We will dive really deeply into the massive trap surrounding Medicare later, but for now, just know that it is a hard stop.
Okay, no Medicare.
Second, you cannot be claimed as a dependent on someone else's tax return. If you clear those hurdles, so you have the HDHP, you aren't on Medicare, and you aren't a dependent, the IRS gives you the green light. And for 2025, the legal contribution limits are $4,300 for an individual and $8,550 for family coverage.
Okay, so those are the baseline entry requirements. You suffer through the high deductible insurance, and in exchange, you get to put $4,300 a year into this bucket. But on the surface, $4,300 a year doesn't exactly sound like it is going to fund a lavish retirement on a yacht. You know, why are we dedicating an entire deep dive to an account with relatively small contribution limits?
It doesn't sound like much capital until you fully grasp the tax environment that money is sitting in. The environment is everything. I want to systematically break down why the HSA categorically defeats every single other account in the U.S. tax code. It all comes down to a concept called the triple tax advantage.
And this is where the optical illusion of the tax code really comes into play. I feel like most people hear tax advantage and their eyes just immediately glaze over.
Oh, 100%. It sounds like CPA jargon.
It really does. But understanding this three-part mechanism is the key to the entire strategy. Walk us through the life cycle of a dollar inside this account.
Okay, let's track a single dollar from the moment you earn it to the moment you spend it in retirement. Stage 1 is the entry point. The money goes in. With an HSA, your contributions are entirely pre-tax. This is tax benefit number 1. When you put $1 into this account, it lowers your taxable income for that calendar year dollar for dollar. It goes into the account before the federal government, and in almost all cases, the state government takes their cut.
Let's put some real math to that so it really lands for people. Let's say I am a single earner making $100,000 a year. I decide to max out my individual HSA for 2025, so I contribute that $4,300. As far as the IRS computer systems are concerned at tax time, I didn't make $100,000.
Nope.
I only made $95,700. I just erased $4,300 from my taxable income. If I'm sitting in the 24% federal tax bracket, I just saved over $1,000 in cold, hard cash that I would have otherwise just mailed to the Treasury simply by moving money from my checking account to my HSA.
That is exactly the math. You are guaranteeing yourself an immediate, risk-free return on your money simply by shielding it from current taxation. Now, that specific benefit, the pre-tax contribution, is identical to how a traditional 401k works. But here's where the HSA really begins to pull ahead. Stage 2 is the growth phase. Tax benefit number 2 is that the money grows completely tax-free.
Completely.
Yes. Any investment gains, any stock market appreciation, any dividends paid out by companies you hold, or just compounding interest that happens inside that HSA wrapper, it all accumulates with zero tax drag. The IRS does not tax the growth year over year for as long as the account exists.
We really need to emphasize what tax drag actually means, because I think a lot of retail investors severely underestimate how destructive it is. If you just open a regular taxable brokerage account on an app on your phone and buy an S&P 500 index fund,
Yeah.
every single time a company in that fund pays a dividend, you owe taxes on it that year.
Right, you get a 1099 form.
Exactly. If you sell a stock to rebalance your portfolio for a profit, the IRS swoops in and takes capital gains tax. And that slice might seem small, maybe 15% of the profit. But over 20 or 30 years, that constant friction, that annual bleeding of capital, it utterly destroys your compounding curve. But in the HSA, nothing. No taxes on the way in, no taxes on the growth.
It is a completely sealed ecosystem. And that leads us to stage 3, the exit strategy, which is the rarest tax benefit in existence. Tax benefit number 3. Withdrawals are completely tax-free when used for qualified medical expenses, and that applies at absolutely any age, whether you are 35, 65, or 95.
So if I follow the rules, the IRS never touches a single cent of this money, ever.
Never. The principal went in untaxed, the decades of compounding growth were untaxed, and the final distribution is untaxed. It is literally the only account designed this way. And if we zoom out and connect this to the broader landscape of retirement planning, we can compare it directly to the heavy hitters to show just how unprecedented this architecture really is.
I think we have to run that comparison because a lot of people listening are likely worshiping at the altar of the Roth IRA. Financial media, blogs, they all just obsess over the Roth IRA as the ultimate wealth building tool. How does the HSA beat the Roth?
Well, the Roth IRA is a fantastic tool, unquestionably. But look closely at the mechanics. With the Roth IRA, you get tax-free growth and you tax-free withdrawals in retirement.
Right.
That is a double tax advantage. But you have to fund it with after-tax dollars. The IRS takes its pound of flesh from your paycheck first, and you only get to invest whatever capital remains. Furthermore, the Roth IRA is restricted by severe income limits. In 2025, if you are a single filer making over $146,000, your ability to contribute directly to a Roth starts phasing out, and eventually it just disappears entirely.
Wow.
But the HSA, there are zero income limits. You could be a CEO making $10 million a year, and you can still max out an HSA as long as you have that high deductible health plan.
So the HSA defeats the Roth IRA because you don't pay taxes on the seed money. The pre-tax nature of the HSA means you have more raw capital going into the market on day one to start compounding. Okay, what about the undisputed king of American retirement, the traditional 401k? Because that is where the vast majority of our listeners have their net worth tied up.
The traditional 401k gives you the pre-tax contribution on the front end, just like the HSA. It gives you tax-deferred growth in the middle. But the fatal flaw of the 401k is the exit strategy. When you pull that money out to live on in retirement, every single dollar you withdraw is taxed as ordinary income.
You essentially entered a partnership with the IRS.
Exactly, and they just deferred their cut until you were older. But it gets worse. A traditional 401k comes with a mechanism called required minimum distributions, or RMDs.
RMDs are the absolute bane of a wealthy retiree's existence. For the listener who is still in their 40s and hasn't had to worry about this wall yet, explain how aggressively the government enforces RMDs.
Oh, it's aggressive. At age 73, under current law, the government looks at your traditional 401k balance and says, well, we have waited 4 decades for our tax revenue, and we are not waiting until you die. They legally force you to start withdrawing a certain percentage of your account every single year, whether you actually need the cash to live on or not.
You have no choice.
None. You have to pull the money out, and you have to pay the income tax on it. If you have a large 401k balance, these forced withdrawals can be massive. They can easily push you into a much higher marginal tax bracket, and they can even trigger rules that make your Social Security benefits taxable. It can completely upend a carefully planned retirement tax strategy.
And what are the RMD rules for the HSA?
There are none.
Not at all.
Zero required minimum distributions. The government never forces you to take the money out. You control the timeline, the taxation, and the capital completely until the day you die.
So when we stack it all up, beating the Roth on the front end, beating the 401k on the back end, what does this actually mean for human behavior? It means if you are currently using this account just to buy some ibuprofen, pay a $50 copay at the dermatologist, and basically zero out the balance every December, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the sheer power of the asset you hold.
You really are.
I was trying to come up with a way to visualize this earlier. Using an HSA just to pay for a $20 prescription today is like using a Ferrari as a golf cart. You have the keys to this incredibly engineered high-performance machine, but you are deliberately keeping it in first gear, driving at 5 miles an hour on a manicured lawn just to get to the next hole.
Yeah.
You are completely wasting the engine.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. You are voluntarily trading a massive future fortune for a very minor cash flow convenience today. The conventional approach, which again is the default behavior taught by HR departments, is to use the funds immediately to ease the pain of the high deductible. The advanced wealth building strategy requires you to flip this behavior entirely.
And this brings us to the absolute core of the deep dive, the secret mechanics. We've established that the HSA is the undisputed heavyweight champion of the tax code. We know the Ferrari is, but knowing that a car is fast doesn't really help you unless you know how to drive it.
Yeah.
How do we take this vehicle off the golf course and put it on the highway?
We execute it through a systematic method called pay out of pocket now, reimburse later. And this strategy hinges entirely on what I consider the most astonishing IRS loophole currently on the books. It is 100% legal. It is explicitly permitted in the IRS tax code documentation. But because it requires delayed gratification, almost nobody in the mainstream talks about it.
Whenever we use the word loophole, people get nervous that they are doing something shady.
Yeah.
Walk us through the exact rule. What did the legislature actually write down?
The IRS rule explicitly states that you can withdraw money from your HSA tax-free to reimburse yourself for qualified medical expenses. That is the intended function. But, and this is the architectural flaw that we are exploiting, there is absolutely no statute of limitations on when that reimbursement must occur.
I want to pause the entire conversation right here, because the first time I heard this, I honestly thought I misread the tax code. Let's ensure this lands for the listener. There is no time limit.
None whatsoever. The IRS does not require you to reimburse yourself in the same calendar year the medical expense occurred. As long as the medical expense happened after the date you officially established and opened the HSA, and it was considered a qualified medical expense at the time the service was rendered, you can reimburse yourself a week later, a year later, or 40 years later.
Okay, let's ground this in reality. Let's walk through the actual granular step-by-step execution of this strategy, because I want the listener to be able to picture themselves executing this tomorrow morning. Let's say I go to an orthopedic surgeon for knee issue. I haven't hit my deductible yet, so I get a bill in the mail for $500. I have $5,000 currently sitting in my HSA from payroll deductions. What exactly do I do?
Step 1 requires psychological discipline. You look at that $500 bill, you look at your HSA debit card, and you deliberately ignore the card.
Put it in a drawer.
Exactly. You do not touch the HSA funds. Instead, you pay that $500 medical bill with regular after-tax money from your normal everyday checking account. You absorb the cost out of pocket.
I'll play devil's advocate here. That feels incredibly painful. I have the tax-free money sitting right there in an account literally designed for medical bills, and you're telling me to drain my personal checking account instead.
It does feel counterintuitive initially, but here's step 2. You take the receipt for that $500 medical bill, along with the proof that you paid it, and you save it. You secure it. Step 3. Because you didn't touch the $5,000 sitting in your HSA, you take that entire balance and you invest it in the broad stock market. You buy low-cost equity index funds exactly like you would in your 401k or IRA. Step 4. You leave it alone. You let that money compound tax-free for the next 20 or 30 years.
So the money is multiplying in the background while I'm just living my life.
Yeah.
And then what? What is the actual end game?
The end game happens in retirement. Let's fast forward 30 years. That original $5,000 you invested has, through the power of compounding at an average market return, grown into $30,000 or $40,000. You are now retired, and you want some tax-free cash to go on a trip or maybe supplement your income. You pull out that 30-year-old receipt for the $500 knee doctor visit, You hand it to the HSA custodian, and you withdraw $500 from the account completely tax-free.
Wow.
You just let the stock market pay for a medical bill you incurred decades ago, and you got to keep all the explosive compounding interest that happened in the intervening years entirely tax-free.
That is just phenomenal. You are essentially utilizing your past medical misery to launder your future investment gains into totally tax-free income. The receipt is the key that unlocks the tax-free vault. But I have to push back heavily on the logistics of this. Are you seriously suggesting that our listeners, who are already totally overwhelmed with daily life, save a CVS pharmacy receipt or a doctor's invoice for 20 or 30 years? Have you actually looked at a physical receipt from even 6 months ago?
Oh, they fade completely.
The thermal ink they use degrades. It literally turns into a blank, yellowed piece of paper. If I roll up to an IRS audit in the year 2045 with a shoebox full of faded blank paper, they are going to hit me with massive penalties.
You are 100% correct to push back on that, and it is the single biggest point of failure for people attempting this strategy. Do not use a physical shoebox.
Please don't.
The IRS absolutely can and occasionally will audit HSA withdrawals, especially if they see massive five-figure tax-free distributions suddenly happening in retirement. And in an audit, the burden of proof rests entirely on your shoulders.
Yeah.
You have to prove definitively that every single dollar you withdrew was tied to a legitimate, unreimbursed medical expense.
So how do we survive that level of federal scrutiny without turning our homes into, like, filing cabinets?
You must build a bulletproof digital paper trail. The moment you incur a medical bill and generate a proof of payment, like a credit card statement showing the transaction, you digitize it immediately. You can go the manual route, create a secure cloud storage folder on Google Drive, Dropbox, or Apple iCloud. You take a clear photo of the itemized receipt, take a screenshot of the payment proof, and drop them into a folder labeled by the tax year. But honestly, the modern financial tech ecosystem has caught up to this specific strategy, making the manual method somewhat obsolete.
Explain that. What are the platforms doing now?
The top-tier modern HSA providers, companies like Lively or Fidelity HSA, have built-in receipt storage and reimbursement tracking features directly on their mobile apps and websites. When you pay a bill out of pocket, you simply snap a photo within their app. You enter the date, the amount, and the provider. The platform then holds that receipt in a secure digital vault indefinitely.
That's brilliant.
And more importantly, it continuously calculates a running tally of your total available to reimburse balance. It completely automates the paper trail. If the IRS ever knocks on your door, you just export a clean, itemized PDF report directly from the brokerage, proving that every dollar you pull out later is backed by a verified past expense.
Let's pull on that thread regarding the providers for a second, because I think a massive percentage of people just blindly use whatever random, obscure bank their corporate HR department selected for the company plan. And frankly, a lot of those legacy HSA administrators are predatory. They charge $3 or $4 a month just in maintenance fees, and they only let you hold the money in a basic cash account earning something insulting like 0.01% interest.
That is a critical pitfall. If you leave the money sitting in cash in a legacy bank account, the entire triple tax advantage is rendered useless. 0% growth is still zero, even if it's technically tax-free. The entire engine of this strategy relies on exposing the capital to the stock market. You have to invest the money.
I know a lot of people are intimidated by the idea of investing their healthcare money. How does investing in HSA actually work mechanically?
Well, it depends heavily on the custodian. Many of those older legacy HSA providers require you to maintain a minimum cash balance before they will even unlock the investment portal for you. Usually, they mandate that you keep $1,000 or $2,000 sitting in cash at all times.
Why do they do that?
Yeah.
From a consumer standpoint, it just feels like they are holding my money hostage.
They do it for two reasons. First, the stated reason is liquidity. They assume you are using the debit card frequently and want to ensure transactions don't bounce. But the real underlying financial reason is that banks make money off the float.
Of course.
They take that $2,000 of your cash, lend it out, or invest it on their back end at 5% and pay you 0.01%. They are earning a net interest margin off your idle capital. Once your balance exceeds that mandatory threshold, say you have $3,000, then they will allow you to sweep that extra $1,000 into an investment account.
Okay, so once I finally get the money into the investment side, what exactly are we buying? We aren't day trading highly volatile tech stocks or cryptocurrency in our healthcare account, right?
Absolutely not. You treat the HSA exactly like an extension of your primary retirement portfolio. You want broad, diversified, low-cost index funds. Total stock market funds, S&P 500 funds, or target date retirement funds. The goal is steady, long-term, compounding growth that tracks the overall economy. But let's address the elephant in the room. What if your employer's chosen HSA provider has terrible investment options, high fees, or a huge cash minimum? You are not trapped.
Wait, really? I always assume that if the company picks the provider, you're locked into their ecosystem until you quit your job or get fired.
That is true for a 401k, but not for an HSA. While you generally must have your payroll contributions routed to the employer's chosen bank in order to get the seamless pre-tax payroll deduction, the IRS legally allows you to roll over funds from that terrible corporate HSA to a much better provider of your own choosing like Fidelity, which has zero minimums to invest, zero fees, and broad fund selection. You can execute this maneuver called a trustee-to-trustee transfer once every 12 months with absolutely no tax penalty.
That is an incredible, actionable pro tip. So the workflow is you let the money build up automatically in the clunky employer account via payroll deductions, and once a year you just log in, request a transfer, sweep all the capital over to your preferred modern brokerage, and immediately deploy it into index funds. You take total control of the capital.
Exactly. You act as the CFO of your own healthcare money. And to clearly illustrate why taking control and getting this money invested is so incredibly vital, let's ground this in a real-world mathematical projection. Let's run a scenario with a hypothetical investor. Let's call her Maria.
Okay, let's bring Maria into the studio. Give us the profile. Who is Maria?
Maria is 44 years old. She earns a salary of $78,000 a year, and she is currently enrolled in her employer's high-deductible health plan. She listens to this exact deep dive, understands the strategy, and decides to execute. Starting at age 44, she begins maxing out her individual HSA contribution. For our example, we'll use the 2025 limit of $4,300 a year and assume she just maintains that constant contribution level.
Okay, let's track the mechanics. She is putting $4,300 a year into the account via payroll. When she goes to the dentist or gets a prescription, she is paying those bills out of pocket from her regular checking account, and she is saving the receipts digitally in her Fidelity app. What is she doing with the $4,300 inside the account?
She is immediately sweeping the entire balance into a total stock market index fund every single time she gets paid. Now let's assume a relatively conservative historical average return of 7% annually after inflation. Maria maintains this exact discipline every year from age 44 until she officially retires at age 65. That is 21 years of uninterrupted, disciplined saving and investing.
Let's do the raw math on the contributions first. 21 years of contributing $4,300 a year means she has personally put in roughly $90,000 of her own cash over that entire time frame.
Correct. But because of the relentless engine of compounding interest operating inside a completely tax-free wrapper, her actual account balance at age 65 isn't $90,000. It has swelled to well over $200,000.
Think about that. Over $200,000 generated from just a $4,300 annual commitment.
Yes. And here's where the payoff hits. Because she spent 21 years diligently digitizing and saving her medical receipts. Every single copay, every pair of prescription glasses, every dental crown, every minor procedure, she has likely accumulated tens of thousands of dollars in documented, legally verified, unreimbursed medical expenses.
Right.
On the day she retires, she can hand that digital ledger to the custodian and withdraw $30,000 or $40,000 from that $200,000 balance in a single afternoon, completely tax-free, to use for whatever she wants. And the IRS cannot touch a dime of the $110,000 in growth that the market generated for her.
That is it's a financial superpower. The math undeniably requires immense patience and cash flow discipline in the present, but the payoff in the future is astronomical. And, we need to pivot the conversation here because this strategy isn't just about clever tax accounting or trying to outsmart the IRS. We need to talk about the demographic imperative of this strategy. We stated in the intro that we were going to specifically focus on women over 40. Why are we targeting them? Why is this so much more of a critical structural necessity for women than it is for men?
This is where we have to connect the cold, objective math of the tax code to the lived sociological reality of our economy. The gender retirement gap is not a myth. It is a measurable structural crisis. When financial planners look at the aggregate data, the picture is incredibly stark. According to comprehensive research, women are 80% more likely than men to face impoverishment in retirement.
I really want that statistic to sink in for everyone listening. 80% more likely to be impoverished. That is not a marginal statistical rounding error. That is indicative of a systemic failure in how wealth is accumulated and distributed. Why is that happening on such a massive scale?
It is driven by a combination of compounding structural factors, and the HSA happens to be the mathematically perfect antidote to almost all of them. Let's start with the most obvious biological and actuarial reality, which is life expectancy. Women live on average about 5 to 6 years longer than men.
Which, on a personal level, is a beautiful thing. But from a strict financial planning perspective, living longer is a massive liability.
Exactly. Longevity risk is the hardest thing to plan for. That is 5 to 6 additional years of needing to buy groceries, pay property taxes, maintain a home, and most importantly, pay for escalating healthcare costs. It means more years of paying Medicare premiums, dealing with prescription costs, absorbing out-of-pocket medical expenses, and facing an incredibly high likelihood of needing intensive long-term care. To put a concrete number on this disparity, recent estimates from Fidelity show that a 65-year-old woman retiring right now needs approximately $165,000 saved just to cover out-of-pocket healthcare costs in retirement.
Just for healthcare. That does not include housing, travel, food, or utilities. Just the baseline cost of staying alive and medically stable. $165,000.
And critically, that figure does not even include the catastrophic cost of long-term nursing home care, which we will address in detail shortly. Now, compare that 165,000 to men, who are estimated to need roughly $143,000. So right out of the gate, simply by virtue of biology, a woman needs to accumulate tens of thousands of dollars more just to reach the baseline of healthcare security. An HSA, heavily invested for decades, is literally a purpose-built vehicle designed to meet exactly this inflated need, delivering the capital entirely tax-free.
Okay, so the life expectancy angle explains the increased cost burden. But that 80% impoverishment statistic can't just be driven by living 5 years longer. There has to be a severe income and accumulation disparity driving this gap prior to hitting retirement age.
And there absolutely is. It is commonly referred to as the career gap phenomenon. Sociologically, women are statistically far more likely than men to take significant time out of the traditional workforce to absorb caregiving responsibilities.
This goes back to the sandwich generation we profiled at the beginning of the deep dive.
Precisely. It could involve stepping away from a career entirely for a few years when children are born, or, very commonly, reducing hours to part-time in their late 40s or 50s to care for aging parents who are declining. Every single time that workforce disruption happens, there is a severe compounding financial penalty. It's not just the immediate loss of salary for those specific years. It means lower overall Social Security benefits because of zeros on their earnings record. It means smaller 401k balances because contributions halt. And most devastatingly, it means missing out on years of employer match contributions, which is essentially giving up free capital that would have compounded for decades.
The math of compound interest is a miracle when it works for you, but it's absolutely brutal when it works against you. Missing just 5 years of market contributions in your 30s doesn't just cost you the principal, it could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost growth by the time you reach your 60s.
Yes, and this specific vulnerability is why the HSA catch-up provision is so utterly critical for this demographic. The authors of the tax code recognize that people, often due to these exact life events, fall behind on their savings, so they integrated a catch-up mechanism. Once you turn 55 years old, and the IRS rule specifies that as long as you turn 55 at any point during that calendar year, you legally qualify to contribute an additional $1,000 per year to your HSA above and beyond the normal limits.
Let's analyze the timing of that. Why is that age 55 milestone so critical in the context of human life stages? Obviously, the government allowing you to save more money is inherently good, but why does this specific window matter so much for women trying to close the wealth gap?
If we map out the typical financial trajectory of a family, by age 55, the intense, cash-draining pressures of early family life often begin to subside. Children might be finally launching into adulthood, moving out, or finishing college, removing a massive expense line from the budget. Caregiving demands for older parents may have unfortunately resolved. For many women, their late 50s represent their absolute peak earning years in their careers, suddenly combined with a sharp decrease in mandatory household expenses. It creates a massive temporary surplus in cash flow. It creates a surge window, a financial sprint to the finish line where you finally have the disposable income to aggressively catch up. Exactly. So let's look at the compounding math for a 55-year-old woman who has family coverage on an HDHP. In 2025, her base family contribution limit is $8,550. When we add the $1,000 catch-up provision, she is legally allowed to stash $9,550 into her HSA in a single year.
That is nearly $10,000 removed completely from her taxable income every year, shoved into the stock market to grow tax-free, and accessible entirely tax-free to combat those disproportionately higher healthcare costs we just established she is going to face.
It is a profound structural remedy for the specific economic headwinds she faces, and there is one more deeply uncomfortable but mathematically necessary demographic factor we have to confront, which is the reality of divorce and widowhood.
The realities of life that nobody wants to plan for when things are going well, but everyone absolutely must build a contingency for.
Roughly 50% of marriages in the United States end in divorce. And because we already established that women live longer, they are statistically much more likely to end up widowed in their later years. In both of these highly disruptive scenarios, having significant individual assets that are not legally tied to a spouse's account or tangled up in an employer's retirement plan matters enormously.
I see exactly where you're going with this. When a couple divorces, dividing a 401k requires a complex legal document called a QDRO, a Qualified Domestic Relations Order. It is highly bureaucratic, heavily entangled, and involves lawyers taking a cut.
But an HSA. The HSA is an entirely portable individual account. Even if you have family coverage for insurance purposes, the HSA itself is owned by one individual. It is completely private. You open it in your name. It travels with you seamlessly if you change jobs or if you go through a period of unemployment. There are no upper income restrictions to maintain it. It is a portable, aggressively growing asset that is entirely yours. For a woman navigating a sudden, traumatic shift in marital or employment status, having a robust, fully funded six-figure HSA sitting at a brokerage provides an incredible degree of financial independence, leverage, and security.
It acts as an unbreakable anchor in the storm. Okay, so when you lay it out like that, this strategy sounds flawless. The triple tax advantages are unmatched, the compounding math is staggering, and the demographic alignment for women over 40 is absolutely perfect. But we both work in this field, and we know that in the complex world of federal finance, every great strategy has a landmine hidden somewhere deep in the fine print.
There is always a catch when dealing with the IRS.
Let's explore that catch. I want to shift our focus to the specific, dangerous timing issues around retirement age, because the inherent nature of this account fundamentally transforms when you hit age 65, and there's a massive trap waiting for people who aren't paying close attention. Let's talk about the Medicare trap.
This is the one specific HSA rule that every single person, but especially those women over 55 who are aggressively orchestrating this catch-up strategy, absolutely must understand. The rule is simple in theory. Once you officially enroll in Medicare, you can no longer contribute new money to an HSA.
Okay, on the surface, that makes logical sense. Medicare is a government program. It is not legally classified as a high-deductible health plan. Therefore, you lose your eligibility to put fresh capital into the bucket. Just to clarify, you get to keep everything you've already saved, right? It still stays invested and grows tax-free, you just can't add to the pile.
Correct. The historical funds are safe and remain tax-advantaged. The danger lies entirely in the bureaucratic crosshairs between the Medicare system and the Social Security system. Medicare enrollment typically begins at age 65, but many people choose to claim their Social Security cash benefits often as early as age 62 or 63.
Right, maybe they are forced to retire early due to health, or they get laid off, or they just want the cash flow to enjoy their early 60s.
If you claim Social Security early, the federal government has a deeply embedded rule that automatically enrolls you in Medicare Part A the moment you turn 65. You don't have to fill out a form, you don't actively make a choice, it just happens automatically in the background because you are already integrated into the Social Security payment system.
Okay, I'm still following. Automatic enrollment at 65. What is the actual trap?
The trap is the look-back period. By law, Medicare Part and Tariff. A coverage can be applied retroactively for up to 6 months prior to the month you apply for Medicare or Social Security, assuming you were over 65 when you apply. If you apply for Social Security exactly at age 65 or older, you're Medicare Part hack. A coverage is legally backdated by 6 months.
Wait, backdated. Why would the government intentionally rewrite your insurance history?
From the government's perspective, it is intended to be a generous benefit. It is designed to retroactively cover any catastrophic hospital bills a senior might have incurred in the 6 months before they officially got around to filing the complex enrollment paperwork. They're trying to protect the elderly from bankruptcy. But for a sophisticated HSA investor, this retroactive benefit is a total disaster. Because if your Medicare enrollment is legally backdated by 6 months, that means the IRS considers you to have been enrolled in Medicare for those previous 6 months. Which means, by definition, you were legally disqualified from contributing to your HSA for that entire half-year period.
Oh, wow. That is a brutal technicality. So
Right.
picture this, you're 64 and a half. You're diligently putting $800 a month into your HSA, maximizing your final earning years, thinking you are executing the perfect tax strategy. Then you turn 65, file for Social Security, and suddenly the government rewrites history and says, actually, you aren't allowed to make any of those contributions for the last 6 months.
Exactly. Without doing anything maliciously wrong, you have inadvertently made excess contributions to your HSA. And the IRS does not forgive this easily. Ignorance of the retroactive rule is not an acceptable defense. Those excess contributions immediately become subject to standard income tax, plus a highly punitive 6% excise tax penalty for every single year that the excess money remains sitting in the account. It is an absolute bureaucratic nightmare to unwind. You have to file amended tax returns, contact your custodian to calculate the exact earnings tied to that specific excess principal, and extract it all before the tax deadline.
That sounds infuriating. So what is the preventative fix? How does the listener avoid walking blindly into this buzzsaw?
The defense mechanism is entirely about precision timing. If you plan to claim Social Security, you must completely halt all payroll and direct contributions to your HSA at least 6 full months before you submit the Social Security application. You have to intentionally create a 6 month buffer zone of zero contributions. That way, when the retroactive Medicare enrollment hits your file, it only overlaps with a period where you weren't putting new money into the HSA anyway. You really need to work closely with a fiduciary financial advisor or a CPA as you approach age 64 to coordinate the exact calendar dates of this transition.
It's like landing a commercial plane. You have to clear the runway well in advance of the actual touchdown.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's assume the listener navigates that transition perfectly. They stop contributions at 64 and a half. They age into Medicare gracefully. Let's talk about what happens next, the age 65 payoff. Because earlier we teased that the nature of the HSA fundamentally transforms at 65. How does the architecture of the account change?
At the exact moment you turn 65, the HSA sheds its strict identity as purely a medical account and becomes an incredibly flexible financial instrument. It effectively morphs into a dual-purpose retirement safety net. To understand the shift, look at the rules prior to age 65. If you are 50 and you withdraw HSA funds for a non-medical reason, say you want to buy a boat or pay for a vacation or fix your roof, you pay ordinary income tax on the withdrawal, PLUS, a massive punitive 20% IRS penalty.
The IRS aggressively punishing you for using the specialized medical tool for a non-medical purpose.
Right. It's a deterrent to keep the money locked in for healthcare. But the moment you blow out the candles on your 65th birthday, that 20% penalty completely evaporates.
It just disappears from the tax code for you.
Completely gone. At age 65 and beyond, you can legally withdraw funds from your HSA for absolutely any reason under the sun. If you want to use the money to buy that boat or pay for your weekly groceries or spoil your grandchildren, the withdrawal is treated exactly like a standard distribution from a traditional IRA. There is no penalty whatsoever. You simply pay ordinary income tax on the amount you take out.
Which is an incredible worst-case scenario. Because the biggest fear people have is, what if I overfund this account and I'm blessed with perfect health? What if I never have hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical expenses? The answer is you haven't lost a thing. The HSA simply acts exactly like a traditional 401k. Once you hit 65, you get the pre-tax deduction and you pay tax on the exit.
Yeah, exactly. The downside risk is just parity with a normal retirement account. But the true magic of the account remains tied to medical expenses. Because if you continue to use the funds for qualified medical expenses after age 65, the withdrawals remain 100% tax-free. And critically, the IRS definition of what constitutes a qualified medical expense expands significantly once you are in retirement.
What are we talking about here? What becomes eligible that maybe wasn't considered an option before?
The most impactful additions are Medicare premiums. You can pay your standard Medicare Part B, which covers outpatient services, and Part D for prescription drugs, their monthly premiums tax-free directly from your HSA. That alone represents a massive, unavoidable fixed cost for every single retiree in America. It also covers major out-of-pocket costs for dental care, vision care, and hearing aids, which notoriously standard Medicare often does not cover at all or covers very poorly.
Hearing aids alone are shockingly expensive. A good pair can easily drain $4,000 to $6,000 from a retiree's budget.
But here is the most important eligible expense of all, and this ties directly back to our earlier discussion about the unique catastrophic risks women face: long-term care or LTC insurance premiums.
Let's hover on this concept for a second. Because long-term care is arguably the most terrifying, gender asymmetric financial risk in retirement planning. The statistics on who actually ends up needing multi-year nursing home care or full-time specialized memory care for Alzheimer's heavily skew towards women. This is simply because they live longer, and they often outlive their husbands who might have otherwise provided in-home care for them. And paying for a memory care facility out of pocket, which can easily run $8,000 to $10,000 a month, can completely bankrupt a family's legacy in a matter of months.
It is the ultimate black swan event of retirement planning. Long-term care insurance is the specific financial hedge designed to protect against that exact catastrophe. But the premiums for those specialized policies are astronomically expensive, especially if you buy them late in life. However, the IRS allows a massive loophole here. You can use your HSA funds to pay for tax-qualified long-term care insurance premiums up to certain age-based limits.
Give me the actual math on those limits so people understand the scale of the benefit.
The limits scale up as you age. For the 2024 tax year, if you are between the ages of 61 and 70, you are legally allowed to deduct up to $4,710 per year from your HSA to pay for long-term care premiums. And you pull that $4,710 out completely tax-free. If you are over 71, that tax-free limit jumps to almost $6,000 a year.
That is profound. Think about the mechanics of what is happening there. The HSA effectively subsidizes the exact insurance policy needed to protect you from the most devastating financial risk of old age. You use the tax-free market growth generated in your youth to literally buy the tax-free armor you need for your twilight years.
That is a very poetic way to visualize it, but mechanically, it is exactly what is transpiring. The HSA transforms from a restrictive medical checking account into a highly versatile, impenetrable shield against the most unpredictable, highest-cost events of aging.
Okay. We have covered a massive amount of highly technical ground. My head is spinning a bit with the possibilities, and I want to make sure we don't leave the listener with any lingering anxiety or confusion about how to execute this. I want to spend the rest of our time anticipating the very real doubts they might be having right now. Let's do a rapid-fire session addressing practical applications, weird edge cases, and ensure everyone knows exactly how this strategy fits into their specific, messy life situation.
I am ready. Let's clear the final hurdles for them.
First major hurdle, the gig economy. The self-employed listener. Let's say I run my own consulting business, or I'm a freelance graphic designer working on a 1099 basis. I don't have an HR department. I don't have corporate open enrollment. Am I locked out of this strategy?
Emphatically, no. You absolutely can execute this. The process is just slightly more manual. You simply have to purchase a qualifying high-deductible health plan for yourself, either through the federal healthcare marketplace at healthcare.gov or directly from a private health insurance broker. Once you have the policy active, you go online to a modern brokerage like Fidelity or Lively, and you open an HSA yourself. The application takes 10 minutes.
But wait, the entire first pillar of the triple tax advantage relies on the pre-tax nature of the contribution. How do I get that tax benefit if I don't have a payroll department deducting the money before I get my paycheck?
Excellent question, and it requires understanding how tax returns are structured. When you are self-employed, you fund the HSA with your after-tax money directly from your personal bank account. You write a check or do an ACH transfer, but when you file your taxes in the spring, you claim what is known as an above-the-line deduction for your total contributions. Specifically, you report it on Schedule 1, Line 13 of your Form 1040 tax return.
Schedule 1, Line 13. Write that specific line down, folks.
By claiming the deduction there, it retroactively lowers your federal and usually state taxable income by the exact dollar amount you contributed, simulating the exact same income tax break a corporate employee gets. Now, there is one slight technical disadvantage for self-employed individuals that we must be transparent about. As a 1099 worker, you do not get to save on FICA taxes.
I'm glad you brought up FICA. Explain how FICA works for the W-2 employee versus the self-employed, because that is a hidden 7.65% tax that most people don't even realize they are paying.
For a W-2 corporate employee, when your HR department takes your HSA contribution directly out of your paycheck, it usually runs through a specific mechanism called a Section 125 cafeteria plan. Because it goes through that plan, the contribution bypasses not just federal and state income tax, but it also completely bypasses the 7.65% FICA payroll tax, which is the tax that funds Social Security and Medicare. It is incredibly efficient. If you are self-employed, you still have to pay your self-employment taxes, which includes FICA, on that money, but you do get the massive federal income tax deduction. Even without the FICA savings, the tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawals make it an incredibly potent tool for entrepreneurs.
Okay, next hurdle, switching insurance plans. Let's say I'm 45. I currently have an HDHP and I've been diligently funding my HSA. But next year, my spouse gets a new job with an amazing gold-plated low-deductible health plan. The premiums are cheap, the coverage is incredible, and it makes total financial sense for our family to switch to that new plan. What happens to the money already sitting in my HSA? Do I lose it? Does the account freeze and force me to liquidate?
You never, ever lose the capital. This is a massive point of confusion. If you leave an HDHP and transition to a traditional health plan, your existing HSA balance remains yours to keep permanently. The account does not expire. It is not closed. You simply lose the legal eligibility to add new money to the account while you are covered by the non-qualifying health plan.
But the money I already managed to stash in there.
It stays fully invested in the market. It continues to compound, generate dividends, and grow completely tax-free. And crucially, you can still, at any point in the future, withdraw those existing funds tax-free to pay for medical expenses, even though you are no longer currently on an HDHP. The money you managed to get inside the vault is locked into its tax-advantaged status forever. And if 5 years later you change jobs again and switch back to an HDHP, you simply resume making new contributions to that exact same account.
Okay, that relieves a massive amount of pressure. It's not a use it or lose it scenario like a flexible spending account or FSA, which I think is where a lot of the consumer confusion stems from. Next question, and this is the big one for the finance optimizers listening. The order of operations. Where exactly does the HSA fit in the hierarchy of where I should deploy my next dollar savings? Because earlier we talked about the Roth IRA, we talked about the 401k. If a listener has a limited amount of disposable income to invest each month, who gets fed first?
Fiduciary financial planners generally agree on a very specific, mathematically prioritized sequence for funding retirement accounts. Here's the optimal order of operations to maximize wealth. Step 1. Contribute to your workplace traditional 401k exactly up to the point of your employer match and not a single penny more.
Because the employer match is literally free money. It is a 100% immediate return on your investment. You never ever leave the match on the table no matter what else you are doing.
Correct. Secure the free capital first. Step 2. Stop putting money into the 401k and pivot your cash flow entirely to maxing out your HSA. You aggressively fund the HSA until you hit that 4,300 individual or 8,550 family legal limit.
I want to challenge this because it feels controversial. The HSA takes priority over maxing out the beloved Roth IRA.
Yes, mathematically it does. Unpack the psychology and the tax math behind that decision. Why does the HSA beat the Roth IRA? Because they both offer tax-free growth and they both offer tax-free withdrawals. On the back end, they are identical. But the HSA allows for pre-tax contributions, whereas the Roth strictly requires after-tax contributions. The HSA gives you an immediate guaranteed tax break today that the Roth simply does not offer. A triple tax advantage will mathematically defeat a double tax advantage every single time.
So 401k to the match, then max the HSA. What is step 3?
Step 3, once the HSA is full, is to pivot and max out your Roth IRA, assuming your income is below the phase-out limits. And finally, step 4, if you are fortunate enough to still have disposable income left to save after all of that, you loop back around to your workplace 401k and increase contributions until you hit the maximum legal limit there.
That is a phenomenal, actionable roadmap. It optimizes every single dollar for maximum tax efficiency. Okay, another critical edge case. Let's talk about mortality and inheritance rules. What happens to this beautifully optimized, tax-free fortress of an account when the account holder inevitably passes away?
This is a crucial estate planning step, and getting it wrong creates a massive, devastating tax bomb for your heirs. The outcome depends entirely on exactly who you officially name as the designated beneficiary on the custodian's account forms. If your designated beneficiary is your legal spouse, the transition is completely seamless. Your spouse inherits the account, and it legally remains classified as an HSA.
So the triple tax advantage stays completely intact for the surviving spouse.
Entirely. Your spouse legally steps into your shoes. They assume ownership, they can keep the capital invested in the market, they can let it continue to grow tax-free, and they can withdraw the funds tax-free for their own future medical expenses. The account simply changes names.
But what if I'm not married? Or what if my spouse has already passed away and my intent is to leave this massive HSA balance to my adult children or to a family trust?
This is where the IRS rules become incredibly harsh. If the designated beneficiary is anyone other than a legal spouse, a child, a sibling, a friend, or a trust, the account immediately and permanently loses its HSA tax advantage status upon the exact date of your death.
Oh, wow. It instantly loses the magic wrapper.
Yes, the entire fair market value of the account on the day you die becomes immediate, fully taxable, ordinary income to that non-spouse beneficiary in that specific tax year. So imagine you have spent 3 decades meticulously building a $200,000 HSA balance. You pass away and leave it to your 45-year-old daughter who is in her peak earning years. She is suddenly forced to add $200,000 of ordinary income to her tax return for that year. It will almost certainly push her into the highest marginal tax bracket, and the IRS will immediately confiscate a massive chunk of the wealth you spent your life building.
That is absolutely brutal. So the immediate actionable takeaway for the listener right now is log into your HSA provider's website tonight and double-check your beneficiary designations. Make sure your spouse is listed as the primary and profoundly understand the tax implications if you are passing it to the next generation. In fact, if you don't have a spouse, would it make sense to strategically spend down the HSA aggressively in your final years, perhaps reimbursing yourself for decades of saved receipts rather than letting it become a massive tax burden for your kids?
That is exactly the kind of advanced estate planning strategy you need to deploy. You draw down the HSA tax-free while you are alive and leave your heirs different assets, like a Roth IRA or taxable brokerage accounts that have much more favorable inheritance tax treatment. Estate planning is ultimately about knowing exactly how the rules of taxation change upon the transfer of the asset.
Okay, the final hurdle. And I genuinely believe this is the most difficult psychological barrier for our audience. I want to talk directly to the listener again. You might be sitting there right now listening to us talk about the miracle of compounding interest over a 30-year time horizon. And you're thinking, this is great advice for a 25-year-old just starting their career, but I'm 48 years old. I have exactly $1,000 sitting in cash in this HSA from a few random payroll deductions over the years. I've been spending the money on copays and contact lenses for 5 years. I've missed the boat. It's too late for this strategy to matter.
That internal narrative, that feeling of being too late to start, is the single biggest destroyer of wealth in the middle class. We have to violently defeat that mindset. The math proves that narrative wrong.
So let's look at the actual math of starting today at age 48 from basically a standing start. Walk us through the late start reality. Let's prove why starting today matters.
Let's use the exact scenario you outlined. You are 48 years old today. You look at your HSA portal and you have a paltry $3,000 sitting in cash. You plan to retire at age 65. That gives you 17 full years of compounding time ahead of you before you even begin to need the money. 17 years is an incredibly powerful window to be exposed to the stock market.
So our 48-year-old listener has an epiphany after hearing this deep dive and decides to execute the strategy perfectly from today forward. They log into their HR portal and change their payroll deduction to ensure they hit the $4,300 individual maximum every single year. They stop using the debit card for copays. They sweep the cash into an S&P 500 index fund. What actually happens over those 17 years?
Assuming that same historical 7% average annual return after inflation, if they compound that new $4,300 a year for 17 years, starting with just that tiny $3,000 base, by the time that person blows out the candles on their 65th birthday, that account will have grown to over $175,000.
$175,000. Starting at almost 50 years old with practically nothing.
Yes, from what was essentially a forgotten administrative checking account. And remember, the rules we established, that $175,000 is completely 100% tax-free if used for healthcare costs, Medicare premiums, or long-term care insurance in retirement. It is a massive, impenetrable financial shield against the unpredictable costs of aging, and it was built entirely in the back half of their career.
It reminds me of the old proverb about planting a tree. The absolute best time to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. The mathematical realities of compounding do not care that you didn't execute the strategy perfectly in your 30s. The market only cares what you decide to do with your next available dollar.
The ultimate success of this strategy does not rely on being a Wall Street financial genius, and it certainly doesn't rely on having a massive six-figure corporate salary. It relies entirely on a fundamental mindset shift. The listener must consciously choose to stop viewing the HSA as a spending account. You have to mentally recategorize the asset. Stop thinking of it as the account that pays for your contact lenses or your kids' braces, and start viewing it as your most elite, most precious, legally untouchable investment vehicle.
The Ferrari. Get it off the golf course and put it on the open road.
Exactly. Shift the mindset, automate the investment contribution so you don't even have to think about it, and relentlessly save those receipts digitally. The execution is truly that simple.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a broader, slightly provocative concept to ponder. Something to chew on that goes far beyond just the mechanics of the IRS tax code. Think about the rising cost of healthcare in the United States. General inflation is one thing. We all feel the pain of the price of eggs, gas, and housing going up. But healthcare inflation historically outpaces general consumer inflation by a terrifying margin. The cost of advanced medical technology, the soaring cost of proprietary prescription drugs, the cost of specialized human care, it is expanding at an exponential, almost unsustainable rate.
It is arguably the single most aggressive and unavoidable financial headwind any retiree will face in the 21st century.
Right. So when you make the decision to aggressively fund an HSA today, and you take the crucial step of investing that capital in the broad equities market, you are doing something incredibly strategic on a macroeconomic level. By building a massive tax-free healthcare bucket now, utilizing the raw compounding power of the stock market, you aren't just saving money. You are effectively shorting the future cost of the American healthcare system. You are building a customized, mathematically perfect survival tool for a highly unpredictable future economy. You are taking back control from a system that is inherently designed to drain your accumulated wealth during your most vulnerable years.
That is the ultimate definition of financial empowerment. You have spent decades managing competing financial priorities, sacrificing to care for others, navigating the structural penalties of career gaps. Now you possess the specific knowledge required to put the most powerful tax-advantaged tool in America to work specifically for you. It is time to take the Ferrari out of the garage.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this deep dive challenged your assumptions and changed the way you look at your financial toolkit, please subscribe to the channel. We are constantly breaking down these complex systems to give you the leverage and clarity you need to succeed. Keep questioning the defaults, keep optimizing your strategies, and we'll see you on the next Deep